Welcome to the podcast of course they make me crazy. It's about crazy family stories. We all have one, right? More importantly, it's for those of you living with someone who suffers with a mental illness. You can start to feel lost in their world. And I get it. I grew up with a bipolar mom addicted to pain pills. Hoping the stories shared here will help you through difficult days. It's not all serious. We laugh and joke too. If you have little ones around, hop in your headphones. Adults only, please. Hey there, thank you so much for joining me on Of Course They Make Me Crazy. I'm April Norris, the host. So guess who's joining me again? Oh, Dr. Lobel is back, Dr. Daniel Lobel. He's back to talk about borderline personality disorder. And so, hey there, Dr. Lobel, how are you?
Doing great. Happy Memorial Day.
Happy Memorial Day weekend. Okay, so I invited you back really to talk more about this, but to help me close out the 1 year anniversary of this podcast. I've been doing this for 1 year. So ironically, the 1 year anniversary is going to be June 12th. Why that's ironic is it will also be the 5th year anniversary of my mother's death. And this is why I started this podcast, my mama. So here we are. Thank you for joining me again to close this out. And also, the reason I brought you on is because our borderline personality disorder episode that we did nearly a year ago was the highest downloaded episode of the podcast consistently through the whole, every month. So so people want to know more about this topic, of course. And you are nearly 30 years. You corrected me this morning. 30 years you've been helping families get through BPD. And you've written 2 books on the topic. So, this topic with you've written books on it, it probably doesn't surprise you that it is such a hot topic and people want to know more about it, or does it surprise you?
No, it doesn't surprise me. It's an emergent topic. In other words, so many of the responses I get from people, which I think is representative of the general population, is sort of people knew that there was something wrong, either in a loved one or sometimes in themselves and their families, and they grasp to try to understand what is this, what is going on. And so when they see my work and the work of some others in the area, they say, oh, finally, there's a name to it. Someone understands this. I get it. And so I think it's emergent, and I think we're still learning more and more about the disease, the disorder, and how to work with it.
So let's talk. So, another reason I wanted to have you on is because I got somewhat of a little bit of a negative email, and I addressed this during my last episode just a tad. But a few weeks ago, there was a woman that emailed me referring back to our original borderline personality disorder episode. And so we won't spend too much time on this, but I wanted to kickstart our conversation off today by reading what she wrote. And then we can kind of address it, and then we can go on. And I think that this episode would be very good for her to hear, because we will be addressing some of her issues. But this is what she wrote. She says, I felt compelled to reach out and let you know that I really wished you'd have treated the BPD episode with compassion. I have BPD because of complex PTSD due to persistent childhood trauma. My mother has dissociative identity disorder and was in a mental institution the majority of my early life. And I have a father who was too preoccupied to give a dang about the emotional needs of his kids. I have never had a chance to develop a healthy sense of self. No one was available to teach me to relate to others in a healthy way. How about you talk about that on your show? That those who have BPD probably ended up with it from some sort of childhood trauma, and that we should treat them with kindness, respect, and compassion. Everyone deserves that, right? Even those with BPD. Not cool, guys. And it ends there. So as you, Dr. Lobel, you know this, and it's not your intent. We don't want to disrespect anyone. And she's right. Everybody should be treated with kindness. But I went back and I listened to that episode 2 times after I got that email, because I just felt like that's what I needed to do. And, I feel very 100% that we were not disrespectful. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. When I read that email, I was perturbed. And my first, indication, or my first thought was, well, of course you have BPD. You sure do sound like someone with it. Right. And so, but she had a point that we didn't really cover, how and why people are diagnosed with it. But, this podcast focuses on those of us who live with people with BPD and things of that sort. But I just wanted your thoughts on her email.
Well, I absolutely agree with her. And I live my life and I agree with you, April, that everybody should treat one another with kindness and respect. I think if we all did that, we would be living in a much better world, and I might be out of business.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that doesn't happen all the time. And the issue of borderline personality disorder falls into a category of mental illnesses that cause pain and suffering in those who have the mental illness, but also the mental illness causes them to cause pain and suffering to those around them. And so we end up with the person who is suffering from the disorder itself, in this case, BPD. And then we have those around them who are suffering from the effects of the other person who has the BPD, that the BPD is causing them to cause pain to others. Other diagnoses in this category would include alcoholism, where an affected individual who is addicted to alcohol or other substances for that matter is usually in a lot of pain, is putting their health at peril, and usually their lives are compromised because of it, but also those around them suffer by many of the effects of what occurs with uncontrolled substance abuse, such as draining of family funds. People become abusive when they're intoxicated on certain drugs. Alcohol and amphetamines are more notorious for that than other kinds of substances. In addition to the occupational impairment that's also caused by that. In other words, people have trouble at work because of their substance abuse, various aspects of it, and that affects their family with regard to their financial integrity. Worst case scenario, of course, is the drinking driver whose addiction to alcohol or another substance causes them to have a fatal accident and take the lives of somebody around them. And so in terms of honor and respect, and even really celebrating a person who is suffering from BPD or any of these other disorders, but we're focusing on BPD. What we honor is not the having of the disorder, nor do we honor victimization. That's very sad, and we might have some compassion, especially since in the writer's situation there was PTSD or CPTSD, complex PTSD involved, and we have compassion for the pain. But the honor, the respect, and the celebration is when the person fights this terrible disease as much as anybody can. The people who suffer, unfortunately, were chosen to be in the position of being champions of their family and of the disease in their fighting of the disease, and not accepting the symptoms that cause others pain and also cause them dysfunction. In the fighting of this disorder, the writer can join with myself and all of the providers and her own family members to take a strong position against the enemy, which is the disease, not the person who has it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, not to be victim of it.
Not to be a victim and not to identify. People sometimes identify with things And language sometimes, and actually in my therapies, we talk about this quite a bit. Language makes a difference. In other words, is there a difference between a BPD person, a BPD mother, versus a person or a mother who has BPD? Yes, there's a huge difference. There's a huge difference. Illnesses are not part of your identity. Are you an alcoholic or are you a person who suffers from alcoholism? We view it as a person who suffers from alcoholism. We fight the alcoholism and we band together and we honor those who champion against it the most, not only for themselves, but for their families and also for our community.
Yeah, absolutely. Someone probably said, you have BPD. And when some people, when that gets popped into their brain, they roll with it. I've been labeled and I'm going to label myself, which is unfortunate, but it happens. Well, let's get more into this topic. So a few weeks ago, you addressed, is it NAMI? It's the National Alliance on Mental Illness. Did I say that correctly?
You were very close. It's the National Alliance of the Mentally Ill,
Okay.
NAMI, and I addressed the Putnam NAMI, which is the one of the counties here north of New York City in New York. But NAMI is a national organization, and for those who might benefit, which would include both those who are affected by mental illness themselves and also the families of them, can find tremendous resources by looking up their local NAMI pretty much in almost every county in the United States. They're a fabulous organization.
Yes, I've browsed and have gone through their websites and have read their information, and just randomly through the years, if I find an article, it tends to, or something, it tends to be on their website. So, well, good. You did a presentation though using audio recordings of, well, it was just audio recordings of someone reading blog responses sent to you by daughters of people who have BPD. So you have a blog, and it was a response to your blog, and then you had somebody record the writings, their emails to you. So they're really heartbreaking, Dr. Lobel, but they're also fascinating. And I want to set this up. So I'm going to use those same recordings that you sent me. So for those of you listening, you're going to have some random voice come on, and we're going to have you listen to the recordings. But I first want to set the first one up that you sent me, Dr. Lobel. So it's, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's a 50-year-old woman who wrote to you explaining that both of her parents had borderline personality disorder. And I think I remember hearing that it was so bad that she attempted suicide at 9 years old. Is that correct?
She did report that in the email that she wrote to me. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and listen to this clip, and then we're going to come back.
Both of my parents had BPD. I am in my 50s and grew up in a time when not much was known about common behavioral disorders. BPD was thought untreatable back then, so it would have been a lost cause even if my parents had been diagnosed. They both lost parents at extremely young ages, and sadly, this shared experience is likely what brought them together. My childhood was one long, non-stop abusive episode. They were jealous and suspicious towards each other, needy and frequently dysregulated. Violence was a daily occurrence, as was incest. I was told by my own therapist that I do not have BPD, but I do suffer chronic depression, PTSD, and attempted suicide for the first time at 9 years old. I knew things were hopeless for me when my mother berated me one day for not being grateful that I had her, since she didn't have a mom herself. She was jealous of what I had and never stopped hating me because of it. Now, with my own kids, I am unsure of myself and felt I had imposter syndrome as a mother. They sadly have tried to assure me that they believe I am a good mother. I was so broken by my own upbringing that I will probably spend the rest of my life in therapy trying to heal the damage that a disorder that I myself do not have did to my psyche and my spirit.
Okay, so Dr. Lobel, so someone in her situation, how does she ever heal from that? Does she ever heal from something like that?
That's a wonderful question, April. And I wish we had a few months to sit here and talk about that, because we can, but I'll try to break it down a little bit into some not only meaningful, but useful parts, because it is the $99,000 question, as used to be referred to.
Yeah.
When $99,000 actually value.
Is that how much money they spend on services trying to heal from it? No, I'm just teasing. I know it's probably different for every person, but I'd love to hear your expertise on that.
Well, one of the things that is very meaningful and I think very helpful to look at is that people who experience a parent that has BPD as a child have a very unique experience, and also one which is actually different from the adult's experience, even the same person as an adult. And the reason is that a child, say a 9-year-old, for example, that is with a parent who can be hurtful or abusive, either because of BPD or for other reasons, because of alcoholism or some other mental illness or some other circumstance, the 9-year-old person is trapped. 9-year-olds cannot take care of themselves. They're not legally permitted to try. If they did try, they would fail. Human beings are generally not capable of taking care of themselves, and they are stuck. They cannot leave the home other than in extreme situations, which would involve changes of custody, guardianship, et cetera, which do happen sometimes. But for most people, they're stuck. And because they're stuck, they adapt to constant or consistent abuse or hurtful behavior by a primary caretaker by fragmenting themselves. The fragmentation of themselves enables them, and this is actually where I believe that the DID, the dissociative identity disorder, and the dissociation in general that's associated both with BPD and with PTSD occurs, where the person attempts to be there in the sense of physically being there because they have no choice, but they emotionally and mentally remove themselves from caustic, toxic situations that are occurring with the caretaker. This inhibits the natural process of identity formation, which is one of consolidation and increases in durability. And rather, the fragmented parts of the personality that occur, especially at 9, and it would be even worse at age 6. The younger it is, the worse it is. These fragments then start to diverge from one another rather than consolidating, and can produce a full-blown dissociative situation. So in terms of healing from this, people need to, as adults, first start at the position of realizing no longer trapped.
Yeah.
Adults are no longer trapped. And that makes all the difference in the world, because interpersonally, we're going to be setting boundaries. And that means you have to be able to leave. And the 9-year-old can't leave. The 50-year-old can leave when she wants and when she needs to in order to preserve her mental health, or it could be even her physical health. The problem is that when it comes time to leave, they experience what we call regression. They go back in time, not only to the time when at 9 years old, when all of this started, or maybe perhaps when it was at its worst, not only do they go back there in terms of memory, but they go back there in terms of their way of looking at the world and also in the way of dealing with their emotions. And they can become very much childlike in their thinking and in their reactions. Again, because the personality growth stopped because of the need to fragment. And the fragmentation had become a defense, a way of coping with being hurt or being abused. So the healing piece of it is now they have to recognize that you don't need to fragment. You never should fragment because you don't have to stay. You can leave. And so we turn the fragmentation really 180 into a process of consolidation and the protection of the self as a consolidated self, which means you can't touch this anymore. And that's the key healing, identifying the regressions and being able to halt those regressions by using more adult-like mechanisms of defending oneself that are consistent both with not being trapped and also with a mature sense of self, such as the person in the clip that we just heard shared with us. She decided at 50 or thereabouts, I'm done.
Yeah.
I'm done. And I think we're going to hear one of someone that decided that earlier on. Some of them decided early on, but they're not able to decide that or do anything about it until there's a viable exit.
Yeah. Because she probably just felt trapped still, even though she wasn't physically trapped up until 50, it was still trapped in her brain and the way she thought. And sometimes people, just that little light bulb goes off of a simple comment is, you're not trapped anymore. Boom. It's like, you're right. Holy shit, I'm not trapped anymore. And that's all. That little line is can do so much for someone. And that might not have been it, Dr. Lobel, but it just, it's just kind of like, even me listening to you, I'm like, whoa, you're right. At 9 years old, she was trapped. I didn't think of it that way. I just thought, oh my goodness, 9 years old, but okay, well, love that. So there was another clip you sent me, but I'm not going to play that one. I'm not going to play that one because of time constraints, but I'm going to read it and we'll talk about it. Okay, so it was another daughter saying that she brought her 3-year-old daughter around her mother. So she's an adult, brought her daughter around her mother, and the 3-year-old's grandma said to her, hey, I heard you went to the circus with your other grandparents, and you probably just had so much fun and you like them better than me. And then the 3-year-old was probably excited and said, yes, and then that grandma said to that 3-year-old, you're an awful brat, and then demeaned her for saying, yes, she had fun, and, a total mind, screw there. With grandma. And so the woman that wrote you said that's when she knew not to bring her daughter around her mother anymore because it would be repeating her own childhood. And thankfully that light bulb went off, for that lady. But my question is about this is because I know that you are a big component, a big advocate of boundaries when it comes to dealing with people like that. And so she set a boundary, it seems like, but are children who have parents with borderline personality disorder, are they likely, and I know that this is probably a two-prong and, another $99,000 question for you, but are they likely to be so aware of what was wrong in their childhood that they won't repeat the similar things that happened to them? Or are they more likely, is it a hereditary thing that they're more likely to do what was done to them? I know that's a loaded question, but I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it is a good question, and it incorporates a lot of the elements of things that we're looking at now in terms of causes of BPD and also transgenerational transmission, through the generations and how that works. And in the example that you gave, which is a wonderful one, what we see in that example is that the grandmother of the 3-year-old has BPD. The mother who is writing this letter to me, or email letter to me, does not have BPD.
Mm-hmm.
And she recognizes that things that she was, again, as a child, perhaps willing or had to tolerate herself, she was not willing to tolerate that happening to her daughter. And so she had a protective response to her daughter, which all good mothers do, and said, "You're not going to hurt my kid." And as you said, set up the boundary. Before I get into the generational piece of it, I do want to point out that, because you said I'm a fan of boundaries, and I am, and that's true, and so is everybody else. The issue is that healthy people have natural boundaries, and so a healthy grandma doesn't hurt her grandchild.
Yeah.
A healthy grandma does not compete with the other grandparents for a 3-year-old's affection. That is unhealthy. Again, healthy grandparents, they don't do that, and they don't need to be told not to do it.
Right.
Healthy people have natural boundaries. They don't touch you when you pull away from them. They don't scream at you when you tell them you don't like what they're saying, and so on and so forth. So when you have to actually set boundaries, chances are you're dealing with someone with some sort of personality disorder or some sort of mental issue that doesn't allow them to set boundaries themselves. Interestingly enough, some people are not good at setting boundaries, and these are healthier, actually, people. But when you give them boundaries, they're very happy to have them.
Mm-hmm.
So an example of that might be some form of autism, or just people who have not been experienced in life, and you tell the person. This is one of my favorite examples, actually. I had a buddy in grad school who was from Tehran, and we were going to visit the Middle East, but then a war broke out, and we couldn't do that anymore. But as we were preparing to do that, a friend of mine said to me, "Hey, when you're in Tehran, you don't show the bottom of your shoe to other men. If you do that, they'll get very angry with you." And I said, "I don't understand that." And they said, "Well, he said, "I know." He said, "It's something from that culture, that it's insulting. You show the bottom of your shoe, and it conveys that you're dirt or you're worthless or something to that effect, and it's offensive." Hearing that from my friend, his name was Mosen. Hearing that from Mosen, I was very grateful.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mosen. Thank you.
Right.
I'm not going to fight against that. Oh, I want to show everyone my shoe. No, I'm not. Thanks, Mosen. I appreciate the heads up.
Exactly.
And so healthy people accept boundaries. They don't push against them, reject them, or test them.
Yeah.
So with regard to the transgenerational transmission or the intergenerational transmission of BPD, the issue is whether the child of a person with BPD or any other personality disorder, for that matter, identifies with that parent or not. And so if the child identifies with a mother, for example, who has BPD, and of course we know that fathers can have BPD too, but in this situation, if a person is identifying with the mother, a female child is identifying with her mother who has BPD, and there's no other adult to identify with, then whereas she doesn't like to be abused, she sees that nonetheless as the way women should be, because we're programmed to think the way mom is the way women should be. And I want to be like that. And I see that mom gets a lot of power from lashing out. So I'm going to learn how to do that. And that's where I'll get my power. Whereas other children whose parent has BPD, say a mother in this example, they don't identify with the mother. And they say, that is exactly what I don't want to be.
Yeah.
And a person like that, particularly if there's a stable other parent, could be a father, or in today's world, it could be another mother, they will identify with the healthier parent, and they will not, or be less likely, I can't say not, but will be much less likely to have that disorder themselves because they have a healthier model and they can reject the unhealthy model.
Oh, I like that. I like that. Yeah, I often think back to, my situation growing up with my mom. And even as a little girl, I mean, little girl, like I was probably 5 or 6, and I knew something was not right, and so, and even up into high school when I was doing beauty pageants, and they asked, who's your mentor? And I said, well, I don't really know if I have one. I said, I do love my mother, but I know I don't want to be anything like her, and then, I always joke, needless, I did not win that. But, so I just always, think back to, I feel like in my gut, even as a younger child, I knew that that wasn't right, the way she was behaving, the outburst, and just, even though she was lovely as she could be, a lot of times there were episodes, as so yeah, great way to answer that. I love that. Okay, so let's move on to the third one. I wanted to have everybody listen to this clip too. And also, Dr. Lobel, the reason I asked that question is because the next audio we're about to hear is a woman who left home at 19 years old. And I don't believe that she went back there, but her mom beat her like her grandma beat her mom. And that's kind of why I asked that original question to begin with. But she said her mom always voiced how much she sacrificed, to have her daughter, and that she should just be, happy that I'm your mother and I gave birth to you, and that I brought you into this world, as that old saying goes, I brought you in and I can take you out, kind of thing. But let's listen to this audio clip, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, whether you think she did the right thing. But really interested too, because this scenario that we're about to hear reminds me of this 2-part podcast that I did a couple of weeks ago called Bonding Over Mothers with Bipolar Disorder. And my guest did somewhat of a similar thing. So let's take a listen here.
I left home as soon as I could, age 19, got a job, and never went back home to my BPD mother, who always said, 1, how much she loved and sacrificed for me, and 2, criticized everything I did and said I was ungrateful. Adults said I was a quiet, obedient, submissive child with perfect manners because I was terrified of my mother's rages and beatings for being bad. Yet she described with bitterness that her mother had been just like mine, sweet and charming outside the home, a monster in it. I tried as an adult to develop an adult friendship with her, but it didn't work. Finally, I divorced her, only sending birthday and Christmas cards to assure her I thought of her. When she died, I didn't cry. In fact, I was relieved, but regretted that I never had a mother I could love enough to grieve over. But I have no regrets. She was emotionally handicapped, and I have forgiven God for letting me be born to her. I do owe my toughness and flinty refusal to be manipulated by anyone to having survived her. From the time I was a child, I resolved I would never have children. At 73, I didn't, and have no regrets. I never wanted to be the parent my mother was, and knew that just wanting to be different didn't mean you had the capacity to actually do it. My mother often told me how desperately she tried not to be like her own mother, but she failed. And deep down, she knew, though of course would never admit it. Since my mother died, we are both at peace. I once told her that in heaven we would actually like each other. Except for being a controlling mother who actually hated men, including my dear stepfather, who was normal, and who after 30 years told me he had to divorce her just to save his own sanity, which I perfectly understood. She was, in her own way, a good woman.
Okay, so then Dr. Lobel, give us your expertise on this situation.
Well, I think that this person is, in some ways, it makes me very sad actually to hear her story. And in the beginning part of the story, we hear from her what we've discussed earlier, you and I today, in this podcast, April, about how they are trapped until they reach a certain point, and they just can't wait to get out. And those who get out, they stay out for the most part. And that's exactly what this person did. And that's exactly what she's talking about. I've never met this person. She wrote that articulate and sad email to me. But the part that makes me very sad is her choice not to become a mom herself. And there could be a lot of reasons why she chose to do that. But in this particular communication, she's indicating that the reason she's choosing not to become a mom is because, I guess, because she's afraid to be like her mom, or something of that sort. To me, that signals a part that, despite the fact that she's in her 70s, this is a part that was not healed.
Yeah.
This is clearly, in my mind, a wound that continues to, a gaping wound that continues to exist and to bleed. And, with her, the window's sort of closed. I don't know, there's no point to working on having her at this point, honestly, work on being a mom. She might have some other opportunities in her life and to be around children or to be nurturant, and I would encourage her to do that. But she hasn't she freed herself enough from the model of the mother to not want to be like it, but she didn't have access to another model to hold on to. And I had wondered, actually, as you were talking about yourself, April, if you had another person, an aunt perhaps, or a grandparent, or it could even be a teacher or a coach or the friend of a mother, another model for you that allowed you to escape the situation of having a mother with BPD, and also have a full personality of your own that's different.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think this lady also hit my heart too, because honestly, Dr. Lobel, and I don't remember if we discussed this in prior episodes, but my mom is also a good reason why I've never wanted to have kids. I'm watching this show. It's on HBO. It's called Mare Easttown, I think, or something of that sort, but it's based in Pennsylvania. And it's a detective. She's a mom, and she has a son. He becomes, drug addicted, and he ends up killing himself. And he has his own child before, he dies. And the mom of that child is also, a drug addict. And, in this scene, it's the main character. Oh my gosh, she's a famous actress. I can't think of who it is, but it's a great show. And she says, "Will this cycle ever end? Please, God, don't let my grandson get this illness too." And that is to my fear, is that I want this stuff to die and be done with it in my family. And was a big fear of mine, of having a child that could have this illness, because I don't. But what if my child did? And then I'd be having to deal with this all over again, and selfishly, but at the same time, and also too, honestly, if I were to have ever gotten pregnant, I would of course have had the baby and loved it and nurtured it. But that was always something in the back of my mind that has always, made like a pit in my stomach. What if? Now I'm probably past the years, and if I want to, I can adopt, and I've often thought about that. But yeah, it's sad, huh?
It's very sad, and it's also very interesting, by the way, that and I realize this wasn't part of your question, but I'll throw it in there anyway, because I think the listeners would be interested. That people who have had a mom with BPD or any mental illness, for example, when they have a child of their own, as the child is growing, starting from very early on, the mom naturally, good moms and dads empathize very strongly with their children. And
Yeah.
so when they empathize with a child who's 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, it brings back to them what they went through when they were 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6. And so many of the moms that I work with who had moms with BPD, when they have their own children, they find themselves experiencing painful things through their empathy with their child, going back to their own, their regressions or mini regressions that are caused by their empathy with their child going through the different stages of development. Each of these empathic experiences is painful for sure, but each one is also a great opportunity for healing. And healing yourself from a bad childhood through your own parenthood is a wonderful thing and a wonderful way to bond with your child.
Yeah, I could see that. Well, I think we're going to wrap it up here. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
I just want to add that this is a terrible disease. All mental illness affects not only individuals, but everybody around them. And borderline personality disorder is a hallmark example of a disorder that affects not just the person who we refer to as the identified patient, but the entire family. And a lot of the work that I do, and it really touches upon your last question, April, with regard to passing it down through the families, it has to do with working on the family, people who don't have BPD, but they enable it.
Yes.
And so whether or not it gets passed down, another very big factor here is whether family members who don't have the disease actually enable it, which largely involves giving in to tantrums and inappropriate requests and empowering a person to behave in a way that's hurtful to others by allowing them to achieve their goals by hurting other people. That should never happen in families, ever. I think it should never happen anywhere, but it certainly should never happen in families. So if anybody sees people being hurt in their family by another family member, if you don't say anything and if you don't do anything, you are enabling the disease and you are responsible. So you need to say something, you need to do something. And as we said to the person who wrote to you earlier, we all need to fight this disease together. We need to work together against the disease as an individual, as a family, as professionals, and as part of the community, like yourself.
I love that you said that. And I know during our first borderline personality disorder episode, we talked a lot about enabling. And it is hard to sometimes not enable them because they can wreak such havoc on your life if you don't give in to them. But as you said in that very first episode, we did a lot with that with our mother of just, saying, just give her the damn pills. So she shuts the hell up. And you said, and that made your mom's sickness worse. And it did, because it enabled her to take more medication, and it didn't do any of us any good. So, for those of you listening to this episode, listen to Dr. Lobel and try and fight and, fight it and grin and bear it, and don't enable them. I come from it, and I know it's easier in the short term to enable, but in the long run, it'll be better. Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Lobel, again for joining me. I certainly appreciate it.
Thank you, April. And I guess it's our anniversary too, right?
Yeah, I guess so. Cheers to us.
Lobel has a third book coming out in January, available on Amazon, called Stop Walking on Eggshells for Parents: How to Help Your Child with Borderline Personality Disorder Without Losing Yourself. If you're interested, go ahead and check that out. And I sure hope you got something out of this episode. If you did, would so appreciate a review. Reading those means the absolute world to me. And this episode is going to wrap up my first season of Course They Make Me Crazy. I hope you go back, you listen to the others. They're loaded with lots of crazy, cringy, weird, but inspiring nuggets. And I hope that you know you're not alone. I'm going to take a couple months off. I'm going to get a new lineup for next season and work on that. You can always email me by jumping onto my website, ofcoursetheymакemecrazy.com, or DM me on Instagram. And if you have a topic or an issue that you would like me to address, let me know. My goal is to help you, and doing that is easier when I know what is bothering you or what is making you curious. I have lots of love for you. Have a great summer.